Welcome, good afternoon everyone, or good evening, good morning, depending where you are in the world. Welcome to our final webcast of the year, our festive special, 5 routes to purchase to pay, P2P process excellence. And we're looking at both transformation and optimization. And although this is, the examples here are very much purchase to pay, source to pay focused, the lessons we've learned apply to all process transformation initiatives. So we look forward to sharing this discussion with you and the research we've conducted with our customers around the world. This is going to be a 45-minute session. We'll endeavor to make best use of your time. Please ask questions as we go through. There is a panel on your GoToWebinar interface, allows you to ask questions. Ask as you go through and we'll endeavor to answer them at the end. If we don't, we'll get back to you by email. Any technical issues, try and use the same vehicle to do that. Thank you. So my name is Dan French. I'm founder and CEO at Consider Solutions. Very pleased to host this session and good to see so many faces and names that I recognize working with us today. I'm very pleased to be joined by Steve Rooney, who's a procure-to-pay process service lead. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Dan. Good to be here.
And between us, we're going to share the results of a research and the findings from on this very critical topic. Many of you know Consider Solutions. For those that don't, we are on this journey with our clients to this aspirational goal of world-class finance, which is all about driving better business results, reducing the cost of operations, optimizing cash flow, and having better risk management. And we operate through 3 major pillars on the right-hand side. Financial control and compliance, it's all about internal controls over financial reporting. Risk management, the broader ERM strategies around that. And on the right-hand side, process optimization and transformation, very much the topic of today. And all that is built on a platform of technology and data, without which you can't do anything, of course. So it's a pretty important temple. Hopefully not a temple of doom, but it is a temple. We're very pleased to be in good company. What we share with you, some of these are our insights, but wouldn't be so arrogant as to claim they're just ours. They're stimulated by the company we keep, and these are some of the organizations that help us with that and who we kind of co-create some of these ideas with. You'll recognize a lot of those brands, and many of you are on the call today, so thank you for your continued attention and support. So, talking about this session, that was my introduction. I want to talk a little bit about business transformation and a shift to digital, because you can't really have this conversation without, tackling this topic. And there's a few myths and there's a few critical elements I think we want to share there. I want to talk a little bit about process excellence in general and how that relates. And then I want to talk through the 5 routes that we've determined from our work and discussions with organizations around the world that have been successful in these endeavors. These are the 5 best routes that help achieve the results you want. Then we're going to look at where does this take us and some considerations for you, and of course Q&A, so ask those questions. Just to prove we're serious about questions, I'm going to ask you one. In fact, I'm going to ask you 3, but they're pretty simple. Well, the first one's incredibly simple. Just want to get some context around the audience today. So if you want to answer this, it should be a very easy one. Are you either in shared services or finance? 2, in procure to pay, accounts payable, source to pay, that process focus. 3, another process focus. 4, in IT, ERP, or 5, a consultant or other interested party. This shouldn't even take you 10 seconds. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Please just click 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Let's have a look and see what we got. So it's an even split between shared services, finance, and P2P focus. A reasonable 1 in 5 of you are consultants. That's very good. Obviously, it's that time of year where you've got a bit of time to get on webinars, which is good. Anyway, thank you very much for that. So we've got the right group of people here. Right, let's talk a little bit about digital and transformation. And we constantly get these stories about these amazing digital native companies, and it's interesting to try and pick the bones out of what the reality is and what the mythology is. And I'm not going to go through all of these because this is a whole webcast in itself, but there's 2 or 3 examples here. We hear a lot about, Amazon, obviously. We hear a lot about Uber and Airbnb. And of course, these are 2 companies that are essentially dating agencies that don't own any assets. They just connect buyers and sellers, essentially, or connect a consumer to a service that they want to access. And they do that through hyper convenience and hyper consumer intimacy. And you look at company like Netflix. And I'm fascinated by Netflix because I'm a customer of theirs. There are 5 consumers of Netflix services in my household. I'm the economic customer, and I think I get a direct debit once a month, but I could be wrong. But they pay no attention to me whatsoever as the economic customer, but they pay massive attention to the 5 consumers of their services, to the point they have a detailed profile of exactly what everyone watches, which is fine, for the 10-year-old. It's not so fine for the 18-year-old. Probably some of those things you don't even want to know the profile of, but you get the point. They're focusing on the consumer, and they have less interest in me as the economic customer. Now that turns business on its head, because we've all been taught to focus on the customer. And what I'm learning, talking to all these companies and others, is the real essence of some of the shift to digital is not about the technology. It's about the complete focus on the consumer rather than the customer, and convenience. Those are 2 key things that come back time and time again. So I'm not going to wallow in this, but there's a whole discussion around this, which if you want to participate, we have other sessions to talk about those, because every one of these companies on this list have a story to tell in that respect as well. So what's really going on? We all know that there's a disruption, there's structural changes. We kind of get that. We know, we can see it ourselves, in terms of stakeholders in our businesses, the way our suppliers behave, the way our customers behave, the way our customers' customers behave. And the catalyst, yes, it's technology, but it's a bit more than technology. It's about data. It's about the transparency of information, mobility, volume of information, and the fact that that's kind of really given rise to this consumer awakening. And we're all part of it. We're all consumers, and that convenience and intimacy. Think about your own engagement in where you're a consumer for other brands, and think, yeah, how does that work? And I've thought about this long and hard. And convenience and intimacy are really critical. And the whole shift is so significant that companies that have been B2B, business to business organizations all their lives, are becoming business to consumer companies. And we talked about this on the previous slide, but think about a company like BMW, a massive, nearly $100 billion of premium motor car. All through my life, they've been the ultimate driving machine. That's been their mantra, their slogan. But now they're changing, because they realize the world is all about autonomous cars. They realize about electric cars, and it's about shareable vehicles. So they're now realizing that their future is going to be provision of a premium transportation experience to folks. And that's a consumer proposition. It's not a B2B proposition. Today, BMW sell through large dealerships around the world, and that's their primary focus in terms of the customer transaction, and the dealerships deal with us. For this new world, they have to have an intimate relationship with every one of us who's a potential consumer for their service. So think about that. It's happening in fast-moving consumer goods. It's happening across the piece. And I think it's a massive impact on what's going on in all of our businesses. Obviously, we're all being pushed for less cost, shorter cycle times, less of anything bad, and more of everything good. We know about that. And that point at the bottom, the other thing that's changed is we're no longer being inspected just because of our financial performance. We're being inspected about how we achieve as well as what we achieve. And you just have to look at the news reports in recent years about Apple's supply chain in China, other supply chains, to realize it's now a team game. Our supply chain partners are part of our business, whether we like it or not. And so there's a focus on principal performance and visibility up and down the supply chain. So I think those things are really important things for us to consider before we even worry about technology and processes, is what's happening in business. So turn that into kind of the big outcomes that you might have in terms of process excellence, whatever the process, whether it's source to pay, purchase to pay, or order to cash, or manufacturing process. What are the big outcomes, the big measures that tell us we're doing the right thing? Now, many of you will be customers of the Hackett Group and get your benchmarks from them or from others, but it's also reasonable to have an outcome that's based on aspiration. And fundamentally, the big 7 are efficiency, cost. How do we drive that down? Speed and cycle time. Driving that down might not directly correlate with cost. Quality, right first time. Value creation, how do we create more value out of the process, both either for the customer or for the organization. Optimizing cash or working capital. Customer, stakeholder satisfaction. Now think about convenience, we've just been talking about. That's a very key outcome for a lot of processes. And then we can't afford to ignore risk, control, compliance, and visibility as an outcome. So there's a balance of these things that we care about, and it's somewhat unique to our business and unique to our market, but we've got to think about those things, both at the business and at process levels. So thinking about how that relates to your process, particularly in source to pay, procure to pay, can you just think about what's your primary process improvement focus, whether it's process improvement, process transformation? We're going to talk about these phrases shortly. But is it, one, your focus in your business is primarily the transformation of the end-to-end process, the strategy, ownership, working practices, the whole 9 yards? Is it about make buying simple, making the process simple? Is it about improved vendor management, vendor compliance, contract compliance maybe? Is it about better end-to-end alignment across the functions, or is it about reducing the cost? So that's a slightly more complex question, but have a think about it. Got 10 seconds. Be interested in your views. So 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Transformation, is it making it Amazon easy? That's number 2. Is it improved vendor or customer management compliance? Is it 4, better end-to-end alignment? Or 5, reducing the cost? Let's have a look at the old scoreboard. What do we have here? So that's interesting. So transformation is the winner. So nearly 40% of you are focused on complete transformation. That's really fascinating news. So hopefully some of these comments are going to be relevant to you. Second is cost reduction. And then equal third is make it simple and better end-to-end alignment. Okay, thank you for that. That's kind of interesting perspectives. So thanks. So that's kind of introducing transformation and digital, and hopefully a few slightly different perspectives on that from what you hear generally. So working with these companies around the world, some of the big names, and seeing successes and challenges, we've seen these 5 routes, and it's about alignment, transformation, process, automation, and data insight. And we've started to touch on some of these, so let's have a look. So alignment, let's start with alignment. So this is a big value driver here. Now, why is it important? Now, if you're looking at any end-to-end process, alignment is a big challenge. We kind of know it's a good thing. So if we take procure to pay, source to pay, we've got the big towers, we've got procurement, we've got business operations, we've got finance, shared services, accounts payable. These all have different management reporting lines. They may have they do have different outcomes and different performance measures. So if we want to have an end-to-end process and have visibility on end-to-end process and align around end-to-end process across those 3 towers or multiple towers, how do we align with common belief in the outcome, so we can have a sensible conversation about how the end-to-end process should work best? This is a big challenge for many, if not most, of the organizations we've talked to. And one of the things that comes up almost like as a dirty little secret is this thing about social division. There's an element here that looks a little bit like, and I've seen it myself in different companies I've worked in, there's an element where the strategic functions tend to have a slight superiority complex versus the tactical sort of transactional functions. So that's true in strategic marketing against sales and customer service. It's true in strategic procurement and sourcing against accounts payable. Now, people don't really talk about it, but I more than think, there's a considerable evidence that there is a bit of an issue there. And alignment requires us to break down those barriers and for us all to realize the end-to-end process is what matters, the outcomes of the end-to-end process is what matters, and we're all participating in that. So that's something for you to think about as leaders. Because the big picture matters. It's not enough for us just to look down our tunnel vision on the left-hand side and have a very clear view of where we want to get to in a small set of tasks. The big picture on the right-hand side, it's important to know where the start and the end is. And it's important to work out if some of the paths are too windy and too wiggly, and we ought to straighten them out. And there's no doubt at all that alignment, end-to-end process alignment helps us see the maze for what it is and help simplify it and do a better job. So that's a big issue. And if you want to look at some real practical implications of solving this issue, there's one of the largest global companies top of the Fortune 500 we were talking to last year, and this is some work that they undertook, looking at a procure-to-pay, source-to-pay standardization and transformation process. And they started off by assuming the value was all in accounts payable efficiency, largely in headcounts and shared services, which is a lot of what people tend to assume at first pass. The more they engaged the stakeholders across the end-to-end process, they learned that the big value, and they proved this out as well, the big value was in other things, and the cost saving efficiency was a small part of a much bigger number. And the biggest number was increased contract compliance. That is making sure we actually pay under the terms we spent millions of dollars negotiating. Which sounds obvious, but most organizations struggle with that a little as well. But if you're not aligned, you don't always know. Bringing spend under control, spend visibility, paying on time, not just paying on time as in not too late, but not paying too early either. So that's a really interesting pie chart. If you want to have a conversation across the stakeholders in a source to pay process, that's a very good pie chart to take to that table. So that's alignment. If we know it's a challenge, organizations are struggling with it, but there is big value in getting it right. Second route is about transformation. Now, we all know that technology is changing our core processes, and we know that technology and transformation and digital are all bounced around in the same sentence. So we've got our classic ERP systems, we've got portals, we've got self-service, we've got RPA going on, we've got analytics and social media and all sorts of things going on, which is wonderful. But we need to think a little bit about what we mean by transformation. I talked a little bit about this earlier, and interesting in the 38% that said this was your number one process focus. This is a kind of a substantial change. It's a metamorphosis and a change of one thing into another. So I would encourage, and when I'm talking to with my peers around the world, encourage us to think of transformation as about a business change, not just a technology shift. You know, it's easy to think that implementing a new piece of technology is a transformation, and it may well be transformational for the people working on it, but it's not really transforming the business if we're not changing the business. So I would really encourage you to take that to heart. Sometimes I know that the transformation word and the digital word are really important in hanging a business case on something, okay? So long as we're all clear what we're really talking about, that's fine. But I think transformation is a critical, it's critical to be clear about what we mean. And now let me give you a really good example. So I referred to Uber earlier, and in general, when we're changing our business processes, most of the time, 99 times out of 100 or 90 times out of 100, we're really optimizing existing processes. Rarely are we metamorphosizing, if that's indeed a word, the process. But look at this. This is the Uber example, and you've got to hand it to the people who thought this through. So when Uber enter a new market, they acquire service providers. That's the folks that drive the cars. They acquire a bunch of those, and then they acquire customers in that local area, if they haven't already got them from roaming business people from around the world. And at the point at which a transaction needs to occur, they locate the customer through your device. They propose a service based on what's available, quality of cars, and all the rest of it. They select the service provider who will do the job for you. Interestingly, they commit the service provider before they commit you, the customer. So they commit the service provider before they commit the customer. I mean, admittedly, it's only about a second before, or half a second before, but they make that commitment. And then they commit and charge you, the customer. So you're being charged at the point of commitment. So think about that from your business point of view. That means they've got a day sales outstanding of 0, which is pretty stunning for any large business. You can argue that obviously retail have a DSO of 0, but let's look at the next piece. They pay the service provider. The driver gets paid up to 7 days after doing the runs they're doing, after doing the drives. Now, from the driver's point of view, being paid within 7 days, maximum 7 days, by a big company is amazing, because most big companies don't pay you for a month or 2 months. So their drivers are happy. The customer's happy because they've got a convenient service that they're happy to pay for. Might not be the cheapest, but they're getting it. But what's amazing is Uber have got a cash float. They've got DSO of 0, and they've got a cash float of a week of a very large pot of money. So think about that. That's not a P2P process. That's not an order to cash process. That's an integrated business process. Now that is transformation. And I'm not suggesting that every organization can do that, because it depends on the nature of your consumer and of your customer. but it's worth thinking about changing the way we do things. So I think that's a powerful example. So Gartner Group have come up with, jumping on these kind of things. We've often said that the foundation of any change is people, process, and technology. And Gartner Group have said, well, data's there as well. Data's right in the middle of that. And if you look at that Uber example, data's at the core of connecting the consumer to the service provider, the driver, understanding location, knowledge of the customer, the commit of the transaction, and the funds transfer, all done through effective digital technology. So that's kind of an interesting, to say the least, way of looking at process transformation. And then you have to look at the process itself, the business process itself. What do we really mean by the process? We talk about processes all the time, and here's kind of the source to pay process, the source chunk, the buy chunk, the pay chunk, and broken down into those constituent parts. And being able to define what all of that is pretty important. And also understanding the stakeholders and participants in the process. There's a lot of participants. And whether you call, most organizations, or put it a different way, not so many organizations really have an integrated source to pay process. Some people have an integrated source to contract and purchase to pay. Some people have invoice to pay, because they break it down in different ways. But you've got to decide what your scope of process is and understand it and define it and manage it. Because without that, a lot of other things are not really going to work. So what we've seen from the best in class is everyone who's doing this well has got a mechanism for defining and managing the process and the evolution of the process. So this Pentagon is a good example of that, where if you just look at, it's basically a set of questions for each of these 9 segments that allows leadership and the stakeholders to understand what they're trying to achieve, what needs to happen, and how they're going to drive progress. So from the very essence of the key outcomes at the top through to managing stakeholders, who are the stakeholders and what's their role, measuring and communicating progress in that process, organization and governance, designing a process itself, what are those steps, placement, sourcing, and operation, where does it run, where do the individual steps take place. Of course, there's automation enabling technology in there, but it's only one of 9. Then do we have the skills and capability to sustain this process? And are we managing this as a service? And do we understand what's needed to make it better and to deliver more convenience and satisfaction to our customers and our consumers? So that's kind of an interesting point that we've seen as a great example for companies that are really making this work. So then we get into the most popular topic of the current year and probably the next year as well, intelligent automation or any form of automation. So we're going to look a little bit at ERP, RPA, AI, and anything else you care to mention. So, evolution of digitization. It's easy to fall into this trap of thinking we're on a escalator which started with bespoke systems and client server, and then it went to ERP and sort of ERP's Neanderthal man. Then we had sort of e-commerce and self-service, and now we're moving into RPA and AI. Well, that's an interesting view of the world, but it oversimplifies it. But let's talk a little bit about RPA, which is the kind of technology du jour. And it's important to kind of understand where it fits. So there's a lot of projections about technology, and some of them are slightly frothy. I like the Hacker Group. It's a little bit more down to earth. They take real data from real people, real businesses. So this is, RPA today, RPA tomorrow. In global business services, 10% of GBS organizations got mainstream adoption of RPA, which is great. In finance, standalone finance at 3%. You can read the statistics as well as I can. But in 2, 3, 4 years, 5 years maybe, they see a substantial increase. Now, what's important to understand is when we see mainstream adoption, it doesn't mean that this is going to be the dominant automation in the organization. It just means they have a mature deployment capability for RPA. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, because RPA is important, but it's just one tool in the toolbox. So here's some experiences. We have a whole webcast around robotic process automation, but here's just a little snapshot of it. We all know the positive news, massive productivity gains, ease of implementation, they don't get bored, hard to lose concentration. I think one of the most interesting things is the ability to eliminate frustrating manual tasks, transposition tasks, particularly between Excel and ERP or between T&E and ERP, for example. Making the workplace more appealing to hire into, because These days, there are people entering the workforce who do not want to do those jobs, and they will vote with their feet. So that's pretty important. But there are some gotchas around RPA as well. And we've had great comments from some of the leading lights who've made great progress in getting to maturity in RPA. And not least that it should really be called RTA. It's robotic task automation. It's not process automation, because that's where some of the confusion comes in. So the 400% task productivity increase will not scale to an end-to-end process. Bunch of challenges in terms of governance and oversight. And a great comment there from Walmart, who are one of the early movers in this, which I really like. It's automation makes bad worse faster. What that means is if you've got something bad, you've got a bad process or a bad set of task operating procedures, and you apply RPA to it or any other automation, it'll go faster, but it'll still be bad. And bad at speed is worse than bad slowly, which is a really interesting perspective. But that's not to say RPA is not a very important tool in our toolbox, but we have got a bigger toolbox than this. So everyone's, the frothiness around RPA also leads us to think about AI. Everyone say, well, it's all about, augmented intelligence. So what about AI? Where does it fit in our transformation agenda? So, you will know AI has been around for 50 years or more. And the most popular frothy topic in AI has been machine learning, partly because it's a source behind the autonomous car and some of the web experiences we see, which is about learning from data rather than building rules-based procedural logic, which is, makes sense, right? If we've got a lot of data and we learn from it, that's better than having to have armies of people coding. But more interestingly than the techniques is understanding how it might apply to our real world. So I like this example, applying machine learning in a real world in cancer diagnosis. So I'm using this as an example to really force you to think about how AI and machine learning plays in our transformation initiatives compared to maybe other transaction automation approaches. So if you have a cancer scare, you get a blood test, and the blood sample is sent to a pathologist who looks at it through a high magnification microscope, and they check to see if they can find cancer cells, and it's done as an expert. So some smart people said, here's a great application of artificial intelligence. Let's build a machine learning algorithm, and let's work out by looking at millions of cell photographs if we can learn how to diagnose cancer. And what they found through this AI classifier, they could identify 92.5% of the cases of cancer, which sounds pretty good. In business, 92.5% generally sounds like a good percentage. Of course, when it's life and death, it's not quite so good. The human pathologist turns out to be much better, 96.5%. So at that point, people said, well, maybe AI is not so great. But it turns out that AI supporting humans is even better. And this is really interesting. And this is because the human's better at identifying the false positives, and the AI was better at finding those edge cases, those hard to spot cases. And 99.5%, that's massive, and it clearly impacts livelihoods and lives. So what that leads us to is this idea of humanistic AI, the use of AI to support human decision making. And when you think about that, we need to think about this in our transformation decisions. We've got efficiency drives, that's about task automation, that's about ERP, automated tasks, process suites, RPA. But then it's about how to make sure the decisions we make are fast and right. And a lot of that is about smart analytics, and it's about AI, and it's about those kinds of technologies. And there's a yin and yang between these two. We need both. We need a balance. So, hopefully that gives you something to think about. What that leads us to then is, well, where's this take technology? Because we had this evolution of digitization, which was oversimplistic, as I indicated, and it is. And we used to believe only 15 years ago, we used to believe that the ERP was going to be king of the hill. The ERP would eat up the whole business, all business processes be subsumed to be underneath the big ERPs. That has proven to me not to be the case. It's just too complex and too expensive. But the ERP isn't going away anytime soon, or anytime, I would suggest. It's still the core service of the core system of record around the core financials. And then organizations are buying in best-in-class e-procurement suites, best-in-class CRM, best-in-class HR, T&E, and so on. And these are surrounding the ERP. And we're connecting through different types of technology. It's not just custom integrations. It's not just custom developments anymore. It's not ERP extensions. We're using RPA for those connections. We're using other APIs. We've got some smart technologies to do that. At the very front end, we've got self-service and decision support, and that is enabled somewhat by AI, chatbots and the like, and machine learning. So this is kind of a way of thinking about, when we look at our technology landscape for transformed processes, evolution is an aggregation, not a replacement of technologies. And I think, hopefully this is self-evident, but sometimes I get a little concerned when you hear organizations think they're going to transform their entire process and rebuild everything in RPA, which would be a worrying idea. So that's a little bit about technology. Now, since we're talking about ERPs and technology and the relationship between the evolution, here's a simple little question for you. You've got a primary ERP system in your organization or financial system. Is it, we're only allowed to use 5 choices on this poll system, so you've only got 5 here. So SAP, Oracle, PeopleSoft Financials, one of the Microsoft families, or another, or homegrown. I know I could have had 20 down there to make it fair to everyone, but there's just not enough space on the slide. So hopefully this will take you 5 seconds. What's your primary one? If you've got multiple, just choose the one that's most significant to you. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the old scoreboard. So, oh, right, no surprise. SAP up there, 70%. Homegrown, well, not just homegrown, others. PeopleSoft Financials, quite a few of you on PeopleSoft. Interesting. Nobody on Oracle. Oh, yeah. Okay, but that's quite interesting. So we know SAP dominates. Normally, the audience today are kind of split largely, 40% Europe, 40% North America, and the balance for the rest of the world. And normally the North American blend has got a bit more Oracle in it. But anyway, that's good to hear. Thank you for that. So the 5th route is about data insight. We've talked about data for years. It's been the building blocks, the business case behind shared services. It's been, we've been talking about it for ages. We haven't really done a great job. Now, 15, 16 years ago, there was another Donald who was popular. Nobody's heard of it, this Donald anymore. But he had this great quote, which was bizarre and amusing, but kind of weirdly, savant. And he said, there are known knowns, and known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. And we laughed. But there's kind of an element of truth to all that. And I think when looking at data insight, it's kind of interesting to make sure that we can get those 3 categories. So we know that data has a massively asymmetric impact on performance. Transaction performance, transactions can be right or wrong, and we get an error. But if your data's wrong, all your transactions are wrong. And Hackett Group do some great surveys on this, that the impact on total cost of finance as a percentage of revenue is enormous based on how well you analyze and manage data. So if you look at world-class finance costs as a percentage of revenue, it's about just under 0.6% of revenue. If, depending on how well you're going down this road to data insight and data governance, that can have up to nearly a 3 times the cost of finance impact. Obviously, there's other related activities as well, because it tends to correlate with other behaviors. But it's worth thinking about. If you need to make a case for why we need to get better handle on our data, there's a very good one. So it needs enhanced analytics, better insight, and so on. So what we've been doing at Consider Solutions, for the past few years, we've been doing a research program, applying machine learning and AI to large bodies of data and working out how can we change the model for data insight into core process, and particularly around source to pay, procure to pay. So we know we're all working pretty much these days in globally integrated businesses. We've got ERP systems, we've got a bit of RPA, we've got a bit of e-invoicing, we've got procure to pay suites, we've got multiple versions of ERPs and different instances, and nobody's got line of sight across the end-to-end process. Even those that are just using one instance of ERP and none of the other bits still don't seem to have line of sight across the end-to-end process. So what we're trying to do is take this machine learning idea of learning from data, enormous volumes of data, tens of millions of vendors, and even more invoices, POs, and the rest of it. How can we learn from that to build a model of the process that we can now drive insight from real data? So that's what we've been doing. Very pleased to ask Steve Rooney here to share a little bit about some of the details about that, because it's quite an exciting development. So Steve, over to you.
Thank you, Dan. So as Dan summarised there, the challenge is so with greater use of systems, increased geographical spread, increased use of shared services and outsourcing, it becomes increasingly challenging to see what is actually happening. where things are working well and where there are problems. So the only truly reliable source is the data, the details of the transactions actually being executed. Every other source is subjective, but it's difficult to get the data insights that we need. So that's a key basis of the work we are doing. To assess the core transaction data on a daily basis and provide actionable insights to process owners and finance stakeholders at all levels, combined with visibility of the bigger picture, patterns and trends within the process. So where are our performance gaps? So again, looking at the data we have within our systems, within our executed transactions, identify where we're performing well based on that latest real data, so calculated daily. Looking at all of the key areas that help indicate how well the process is performing generically across the organization and within given business units. Continually measured, so proactive, continuing view of performance, not end of month or end of year reporting, and able to see historic and emerging trends. So it helps us to spot where performance needs to improve and spot where performance is not being maintained and identify the reasons why. So the examples on the screen here, those flagged in red, flag up areas where, again, against the data, the current data within our systems, we can see the number of invoices processed per person per month is less than we would typically expect against a peer group. So we're at 525 compared to an average of quite a bit higher. And similarly, on the percent of invoices paid on time, whether that so not paid late, not paid early, how many are we paying on time, in line perhaps with our contract? So in this case, we had 60%, which is quite a bit lower than where we would look to be. So giving us that proactive insights into what's actually happening and how we are performing day to day. Then having daily insights of immediate visibility of the exceptions and outliers within what's actually happening day to day. So possibly costly transactions, but giving us the opportunity to rectify them before they cause damage. So in the example on here, we're looking at the last 1 day, it could be last 1 or 3 days or so of data, and flagging up those issues, for example, duplicate invoices that may have been created in the recent period. So it gives us that immediate visibility of the deviation from the defined process. And again, opportunity to perhaps stop those duplicate invoices being paid. And we're categorizing these based on thresholds so that we can identify those ones that are red, so need immediate attention, and the amber ones, perhaps priority 2, that we can look at. We've got a bit more time to look at. So those are the ones, the errors we need to fix soon. So perhaps we've got we accept a certain amount of invoice processing errors, but once it gets beyond above a certain limit, then we need to look at why that's happening, because it's costing time and resource. So in this case, we've gone above 5%, so it flags up as to something that needs attention. Equally important, we have the green flags. So we want to know when things are working well, certain aspects are working well. So we have positive, ongoing visibility, confirmation that the process is working well in those areas, not having to trust subjective feedback and periodic reports. So we're learning from the data. And then looking at the bigger picture, so where are the overall exceptions and outliers, things that are in the overall process are not going as we would expect them to. Looking at the history of transactions over an extended period across the organization. So a range of checks within the process. So being process aware and sensitive to how the process should be operating. Looking to identify perhaps local practices, possibly local ways of circumventing the way the purchase order process should be working. Maybe creating placeholder purchase orders of zero value, creating purchase orders without a purchase requisition in cases where there should be a requisition, purchase orders being created when the invoice is received, rather than as the regular process would require that is created earlier in the process. How are payment terms impacting us? So again, coming back to what we've agreed contractually, how are we actually transacting using given payment terms? So the example here, we have a range of payment terms, many 30 days or less, when the average payment terms by larger companies today is closer to 60 days. So opportunities to see where we're maybe deviating from the contract and where there may be opportunities to improve. Then vendor master data. So it's not uncommon that the vendor master data has substantial issues. Every company has the problem, but generally the scale of the problem is too big to address, so it does not get addressed. The master data evolves over time, created and maintained by different groups, possibly migrated from different systems. When there are such a volume, possibly thousands of issues, where do you start? What is practically possible? So what we've worked on with our research partners is putting together an approach that is enabling practical action. So for the first time, some of our partners are starting to tackle the challenge of poor quality vendor master data and the downstream problems this causes. So the example here is essentially we categorize duplicate clusters of vendors into those where there is recent activity. So the left-hand end of the bar chart indicates the highest priority vendors to look at because they have recent invoices and payments, potentially duplicates. And then from here, we can zoom from the 40,000 or so issues down into the 100 or 200, see the detail of the duplicates, review that and decide what action needs to be taken. So with the transaction data and the master data available to us, we also have the ability to have a dynamically updated profile of the vendors in terms of the level of business we're doing on the left-hand side here, the issues that may be occurring, so the quality of the transactions, the quality of the relationship, the time frames it typically takes in the center there, and to compare that across other key vendors. So again, learning from the data, with immediate and ongoing visibility of the latest status. So typically, this kind of work we're seeing is quite a substantial project, maybe a 9 to 18 month project with substantial effort from IT. Typically starting with technology that is not deeply process aware. What we're looking to do is to make that fast, easy, short circuit that cyclical process, so it's more of a connect and go. So plug in with a process aware approach, and to provide immediate actionable insights. So to get some immediate access, as it says here, to nuggets of gold without the hard work that typically is needed to get there.
That's great, Steve. Thanks very much for that. Some powerful insights there. So we're just coming to a few closing points here, which are important, but do keep asking your questions. We've got some good questions coming up. Pop them in. We're going to get to some of these. So where next? Well, many of you who've participated in presentations with them before know I love this slide. Not just the disappointed looking robot, but this whole, again, another great Gartner visual, the technology disappointment cycle. I think they call it the hype cycle. But we tend to fall into this trap of building for new things. We build inflated expectations. We put this big halo effect around the new thing. We start work, build a business case, we start work, and then we realize it's a bit harder than we thought, and it's not quite as great as we thought. And we slip into the trough of disillusionment and then claw up on our hands and knees, bloodied and battered up the slope of enlightenment to eventually hit the plateau of productivity. And there's two issues. One is the whole cycle time takes way too long, and it's painful and costly. And that we've just got to chop the head off that evil beast on the left-hand side. The inflated expectations damages us in so many ways. So it's a critical thing, although it's a kind of humorous slide, it's a critical thing for us to manage in terms of transformation, because we cannot have that kind of shift. We've got to be a bit more realistic about what we want to achieve and have a much faster cycle time. So when we look at the 5 routes and we talk to the case study clients who've going through these routes and the successes they've had, it's kind of interesting as a rough plotting on a scale of the lead time versus a scale of benefit. So scale of benefit up the y-axis and the lead time on the x-axis. And obviously big transformational initiatives have the biggest impact potentially, but they also take a while. Alignment, it might seem straightforward, but it takes time to get people to buy into a common view of the world, but it has a big impact. Understanding the process and having a clear view of the process and understanding the steps and everyone's responsibility, important. Automation is obviously key. And data insight is key. But what's interesting about data insight when it's done in the way that Steve described, this kind of instantaneous way, the lead time is close to 0. And nobody would claim it's as high a benefit as some of the other components, but it's a critical component. So what's really interesting here is what the universal feedback seems to be is this kind of magic sequence that by choice, you would choose to do the data insight first, to expose how the process operates, understand and define the process as a catalyst for alignment with the various stakeholders. You can decide how you want to operate together and what common outcomes you have. Use that as the opportunity for transformation, because that's the best place across the aligned end-to-end process. And use the transformation, the decision for transformation, or maybe optimization, as the foundation for automation. So that's kind of the perfect sequence. Now, it's becoming clear that that is a cycle that makes a lot of sense. The challenge is a lot of organizations are jumping into the promise of new technology and jumping into some automation first, and then hitting a bit of an unpleasant mire because they've not quite got clarity on other things, haven't got alignment, don't understand the process, not quite sure about the data, and so on. So here's a lovely picture I saw just yesterday. Henrik Ekstrom is a well-renowned CFO of a global company. This is his own notes he took a little while ago, and he shared yesterday, and it's a great comment. It doesn't matter what is in the box in the middle, but you've got junk input, you're going to get junk output. So you've got to be focused on what's coming in at the beginning, what's the process and data inputs. So I think that's just a healthy pause for thought. So something for you to consider. I appreciate we're 2 minutes late. So Steve showed you this whole idea of getting immediate insight into today's P2P or source to pay operation. KPIs automatically calculated and updated, no month end, work on that. Looking at all transactions and process activities, instant results. It is Christmas and Will Ferrell is here. So if anybody wants to participate in this, you can get involved in this for no fee. There's no IT effort. All you need is a bit of aspiration and a non-disclosure agreement. And we can explain to you how it all works. But it's a way of you getting a real assessment and data insight on your P2P process today. So if you're interested in that, do send an email to Emma Taylor, and she can set you up with a conversation with the right people. Get hold of her before Christmas, because she's hopeless after Christmas. You won't get any sense out of her for a couple of weeks. We can do some work we can do any activity in January, but speak to her soon. So final comment, I think this is a great comment. We tend to believe, we all believe as children in silver bullets, we believe it in as adults, but there are no silver bullets. It's about doing a lot of things well, and those 5 routes, hitting those well in the right sequence is a really important aspect of that. So this is what we talked about. We have got a couple of questions. We're a little bit over, but what I will do is I will take a couple of questions. I apologize, we're going to be 5 minutes over by the time we finish, but some of these are worth sharing. Let's have a look here. Okay, one which I think is, I probably didn't explain myself well here. So the question is, are you really saying that automation should be the last of 5 steps? Question mark. Right, so I talked about that Fibonacci sequence, that perfect numbers. So the answer is yes, it should be the last of 5, and here's why. It's related to that peak of inflated expectations chart that we discussed. You need data insight on the current process to identify the weak spots and validate your assumptions and priorities. There's no doubt about it. It doesn't take long, maybe take a week or two, but you've got to do that first. Secondly, you've got to be clear on the end-to-end process, where that is and where you'll be applying automation. It doesn't need to take long, but it's worth its weight in gold. Many RPA activities have been dashed on the rocks of misunderstood processes. Just speak to your peers in industry, it's true. The next piece is alignment. Understanding of the process allows for the discussion around alignment. You can choose to align or not align, but at least have the basis of making that decision before you move to the next stage. That doesn't take long. You can say, do we want to do this together, guys? Or are we just going to be silos? Then transformation. The opportunity for transformation or optimization needs to be a clear, articulated decision. Because it's easy for people to say, we're going to do transformation, but if you haven't got alignment, you've got no chance. And then once you've got those 4 questions answered, applying automation will be faster, more successful, and drive benefits everyone's aligned around. So that avoids that peak of inflated expectations. So yes, I stand by that 5 steps, the 5 steps to heaven, transformation heaven. So right, one more. Should we do one more question? One more question. Okay. We're considering process mining / analytics. How does your approach differ? Okay, so process mining is a really good approach, no doubt about that, to look at various paths to process. It's very much a process management view rather than operational view. Kind of quite an IT heavy approach. You need a project lifecycle requirements, consultancy and all that stuff. Our approach is no IT project. It's absolutely operational focused. It provides immediate insight because it's process aware, so you don't need to configure any process around it. And it avoids that whole kind of 9 to 18 month wait for a project to get approved and executed and delivered and iterated and all that stuff. And if you want to have a conversation in more detail, there are kind of more subtle differences. I don't think they're either or. I think they're just different beasts. I'm very conscious we're taking 50 minutes of your time. I do appreciate your attention so close to Christmas. You could be Christmas shopping, but you've been doing this. Maybe you've been Christmas shopping online while listening to this, in which case you get out of jail free card. Thank you very much. Happy Christmas. If you want to take part, either email Emma, or actually my email is there, so you can email me as well. It's been good to have this conversation with you. Thank you. I hope you found it useful.